if I were completely ethically opposed to it, I would be a vegan. You know, it's different though, because you know you can indulge in the hypocrisy when it's like a financial doing, and I think it's a stretch. But people even feel, you know, the complicity of the German people in the Holocaust. I don't think it was very hard for them to just go with the flow. If they, you know, and yeah, you get these guys working in the gas chambers, but even there, well, you know, they put me here. I actually wanted to go fight the Russians, but they stuck me here, and I gotta do this. And then maybe there's a couple guys that are like, great, it's going perfectly. But I think 98% of even the people doing it were kind of, I'd rather not. I don't want to go check it out or anything. More than the people doing the gassing, the complicity of the people allowing it to happen, with quotation marks, is kind of like the people eating hamburgers allowing industrial farming to take place, allowing the cows to be murdered, allowing the pigs to be murdered for bacon, without really, definitely not doing it, but not even seeing it. Like you buy a pack of cigarettes now and they show you lung cancer. That's pretty powerful. If you bought a pack of bacon and it showed you a pig screaming for its life, you know, you might think twice about like what you're eating, but they make a point not to. The same way for many years they made a point to put a camel on a pack of cigarettes rather than a picture of like corroded teeth, you know, because the reality of what smoking does to you is not very commercially appealing, you know. And I think the reality of a violent diet is not very commercially appealing. If you're eating a pack of beans and you get a picture of a plant growing that sprouts beans, it's not very hard to live with.
Mm-hmm.
But
and even the living animal kind of speaks about the dead animal. Do you think it would?
How so?
Like people talk about the dough drop, suddenly it becomes to the 10 million animals that are killed by a state each year. Versus like, let's say a live emu in a street. Like, is that going to relate also to that?
Yeah, and I think it relates to all human-animal interface. And I think that's exactly what's so interesting about it. Is like it is hamburgers and bacon as much as it is dog owning and chimpanzee maulings and all of those things, and the zoo and you know, those orcas that eat the trainers. Like all of that's conjured. Even the extinction of the dinosaurs.
Welcome to Samizdat Radio. Thank you for tuning in. Today we are talking about animal displacements.
If you guys get nailed, which I'm pretty sure you will. I've never seen you before in my fucking...
I know that's you. I recognize your voice.
No, you don't.
I also know all about your warped little plan. That lady, your psychiatrist, she told me. I didn't believe her, but it just seemed too crazy, even for you. I never let myself believe it. Now I know it's true. You're completely insane.
Well, I'm interested in the relationships. And, I mean, I have these daily relationships. But then having a daily relationship that I wasn't expecting creates a new dialogue and makes me wonder more about that. It makes me have more emotions. I feel more like emotions by like seeing something I wasn't expecting to see. Like if I had no idea about the emu and I was in Grand Central and I saw that, I would be talking about it for years. I would be, oh my God. But maybe that's just because I'm always interested. Some people might be like, oh my God, it's like, what a dirty animal. Like, I'm so glad that they got that emu out of Grand Central so I could go about my day, go to my job.
What time's your flight, friend?
9:30.
Might be tight.
Tight. No, my watch says 7:30.
On your normal morning, okay, plenty of time. But today you gotta take into account your army of the 12 monkeys factor.
What? What'd you say?
12 monkeys, honey. In case you folks didn't turn on your radio this morning. Bunch of weirdos let all the animals out of the zoo. And they locked up this big shot scientist in one of the cages. Scientist's own kid, one of the ones did it. Now they got animals all over the place. Bunch of zebras closed down the thruway about an hour ago. And they got something called an emu. It's got traffic blocked for miles up on 676.
I think they're accomplishing by releasing an animal like this one into a city.
That's what they were up to, freeing animals.
Who was? They said we did it. They meant the
The
animal.
animals, yeah.
If you'd like anything in just a moment, Mr. Ginger, just click on the news. There is going to be a live City Hall hoping at the comments.
I think it's gonna be all right.
A moose visited a shopping center in Kongsvinger town, southern Norway on Wednesday, leaving a trail of minor destruction. The moose was caught on closed-circuit television running down the aisles of a supermarket. The moose was on his way out of the bakery after visiting the flower shop.
And then the moose came running at full speed toward me, and I went, "Help!" And I shouted out to everybody, "Help, there's a moose here."
Bakery shop assistant Martin Rodseth says the moose had crushed the table but had left the newly made sandwiches alone.
I had lots of fresh baked goods here, and I just made sandwiches and Norwegian donuts and such. And then it came in and stepped on everything and crushed the whole table.
Staff seem more bemused than upset by the damage caused by the surprise visitor.
Part of the effectiveness of an animal drop is the absence to the viewer of good intention. And often it's taken as like maybe bad intention as like a default, you know, but I certainly wouldn't see it as like bad, but I would be hard pressed to argue that it's like doing good either. I mean, unless you believe that, you know, creating change and flux is good, but those things happen anyway, you know.
So then what would be the role of being this disruptive scenographer or an anti-situation creator? Like,
by introducing a provocative element that then creates like a provocative situation, even if it's like an ethically ambiguous situation. I think a lot of things come to the surface. Suddenly everybody has an ethical consideration for what you can see in front of you, whereas nobody seems to have ethical considerations for where their hamburgers
it's true.
came from.
People go to the zoo and they don't know that those animals have been wrangled. They go to SeaWorld or any marine park, and all of those animals have been forcefully removed and have been sedated and hooded.
Over and over.
Constantly. And to place that in the middle of it all, to place that in front of everyone, to wonder where this animal came from, to wonder how it happened,
right?
To not disclose how it came to be, but to also reverberate or to reiterate that an emu is a dolphin, is a lion, is a fish, I think.
and still bears some resemblance of life that we can appeal to.
It's a power. It's an authority. I mean, the reason that zoos and marine parks exist is to show our power over animals. It's to show that we have something that they don't, or we have like a control over them.
You have to understand something, everyone. Human life comes first, and we're trying our best to make sure no one is hurt doing this. The animals, the question is, why didn't the sheriff tranquilize them last night? It was dark, number one. You cannot tranquilize an animal in the dark. It upsets him. It's like if you got popped with a little stick, a shot. And they settle in, they hunker down, they go to sleep. Obviously, we can't find them in the dark. So what had to be done, had to be done. Even a bear came after one of the officers last night as he was just trying to get out of a car. So what happened with that, no one loves animals more than me, but human life has to come first. And then we're concentrating now today. I've got my veterinarians behind me here. We're going to go up there in the daylight with the sheriff to assess that no human life is in danger. At that point, we will tranquilize the animals. I'm making room at the Columbus Zoo and the Wilds to take these animals. There's primates in the house there that we're going to take care of, and there might be a leopard or two up there, we understand still, and we don't know. There's about 8 animals unaccounted for now that we're going to try and locate today.
Son expression a plus d'importance pour moi que le contenu. La philosophie en général est une question de contenu, mais je fais pour ma part appel davantage à la sensibilité qu'à l'intelligence, et dès ce moment, c'est l'expression par son caractère sensible qui compte le plus. D'ailleurs, ma philosophie ne pourrait en aucune mesure s'exprimer sous une forme qui ne soit pas sensible. Il n'en resterait absolument rien. C'est seulement à partir du moment où je donne une forme qui pourrait passer pour passionné, qui peut aussi passer pour noir, mais je ne crois pas être plus noir que Nietzsche.
But we frame things as art so that we can support our actions. But we frame things as art so that we can support our actions. But we frame things as art so that we can support our actions. But we frame things as art so that we can support our actions.
If you live in Ohio and you see a leopard, a bear, or a lion, or a cheetah, don't run. I'm not kidding.
One of the craziest stories we've ever covered. A bunch of wild animals on the loose in Ohio.
We don't know how much of a head start these animals had on us. Mainly, there were grizzly bears and black bears there. There were cheetahs, there were lions, and there were tigers. These are wild animals that you would see on TV in Africa.
As of right now, about 7:30 a.m., we sent deputies, wildlife officers, and the vets into the property to do a search and recover. We think we have still 14 to 15 animals unaccounted for. So we're going in there to see what we had last night and confirm everything to give to the public.
Kim, can you tell me how these animals got loose?
We're not really sure right now. When we received the call last night, when deputies first arrived, all the gates were open, and the fence that surrounds the property wasn't high enough or sturdy enough to contain everything. So we're not sure if someone let them out at this time or what really happened. So we're still up there doing investigation.
And the owner was there on the premises outside and deceased. Do you know anything about what happened to him?
No, we sent the body to the coroner for an autopsy.
Were there any outward signs of foul play, or was it suspicious, or can you tell us anything? I mean, it just seems so odd. The whole scenario seems so odd.
Right. We're not really sure what happened to the body, and that's why it was sent to the coroner's office.
Do you have any sense of who might have been responsible for letting these animals out? We're going to assume, of course, that close to 48 animals didn't let themselves out.
Correct. We believe that, we're still doing an investigation up there, but nothing's being released at this time on that.
Yeah, and I think it's almost fair to say that, they obviously want to gather all their ducks in the row here before releasing any type of information about exactly what happened at that site. Again, the autopsy is taking place on Terry Thompson. We have heard some speculations about things that we don't want to give out until we get true confirmation. But it seems kind of clear that somebody opened up these gates. So that's going to be the whole issue here. Who was planning to make this happen in the first place? And again, are there other people that are involved with it? Those are some of the questions that we still get to answer.
in your reporting, who was Terry Thompson? I mean, he was a guy who had been several run-ins with the sheriffs. They said so over the years, and an awful lot of animals. But this wasn't a tourist location. This was his farm, and he collected these animals.
He collected them, and he also rescued them, too. So there was a heart behind the man. But unfortunately, though, they've had run-ins with him, as you had heard from the sheriff's department here. He has also been in jail on weapons charges. They found weapons in the property where he was at earlier in the year. So it's been kind of a difficult situation dealing with him because they've had so many calls going in and out of his property there. People concerned about the well-being of these animals. And, of course, the possibility that these animals may escape, which they now have, and really have turned this town upside down in terms of trying to deal with it. So again, was somebody going after Terry Thompson? Did Terry Thompson act on his own? Those are the questions that we still have to get answers with, and it's clear that the Sheriff's Department is not ready at all to release that information.
All right.
You know, what a weird story. I don't know, in all the news I've covered in the years, this one definitely ranks up there as one of the weirdest. Let's just hope they get those animals that are still out there.
The whole, like, what if scenario. That's
killing
why
them.
with live animal drops, like, you really cannot predict anything. Animals are unpredictable as much as people are unpredictable. And so I never try to, like, wonder, really. I wonder, but I don't say, like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens?
This 15th century representation of this mystical creature entering society. The two tapestries that I took pictures of, in the one, the unicorn is surrounded by at least a dozen men with spears that are all pointing the spears at the unicorn. And in the other one, the unicorn is put into a circular, small little pen where it has nowhere to go. And it seems like they're kind of pointing towards this natural disposition people have to quarantine the mystical beast.
But in one of those tapestries, at least one of them, I saw there's dogs. There's 7 or 8 dogs with,
I think it's the one where they're spearing
menacing.
it.
Yep, when they're spearing it with menacing faces.
Yeah.
That are, and there you have it. You know, you have this, like, mystical animal. It's wild, being, like, brought down. And then you have this, like, other thing that, like, we've dominated the beast in a way. It's like a domination of the beast.
Yeah, it's a
in those
sinister human tendency to, like, collectively dominate an animal. And I think actually that's something that would come to the surface. The one thing you could rely on is that human beings would take down that animal in a dramatic way.
So then how do you feel about that?
I don't, what you think, well, yes.
Well, I think part of what's interesting about it is bringing that quality to the surface.
I mean, they'll call it animal control.
Yeah, it would be
shoot it
like
with a gun. Like
it would look like
shoot it with
the
like
unicorn tapestry.
Yes.
A bunch of people would
they would
descend
sedate
on
it exactly.
Yeah.
They would be an exact replica of what we would be doing.
So what is that then that we play?
With a completely different purpose.
Yeah.
So then what is this use of an animal as a medium in art?
Right. Well, I think that's what it's all about, is the use of an animal as a medium as art to allow certain sinister and highly questionable sociological reactions to occur and make themselves obvious. The reacting to the animal by the authorities is as interesting as the animal being placed into a space that warrants such a reaction. The spectacle itself would sort of like fascinate and fixate and thereby like produce its own truths and its own meanings. And I think that's part of what's significant about the element of mystery and unknowing in these types of pieces, that those same question marks become locuses of meaning once the act is performed, and then suddenly you can analyze, you know, the way people reacted, the cameras that came out, the takedown that occurred, the way the crowd reacted to the takedown, whatever, you know, the way people react to the camera.
So even if the animals had been able to be brought back to their cages, the cages would no longer hold. He was condemning those animals to die just as absolutely as he was about to take his own life.
Breaking news right now, stay inside, protect your family. That's the message after dozens of dangerous exotic animals escaped and are on the loose right now in Muskingum County.
A strong directive from County Sheriff Lutz saying stay inside. There just might be a lion, a tiger, or grizzly roaming in your neighborhood.
Breaking news, dozens of dangerous animals, including tigers, lions, and wolves on the loose near Columbus, Ohio, after apparently being set free from a preserve.
Cougars, tigers, lions, cheetahs, and grizzly and black bears.
Even giraffes and camels right now are loose in central Ohio.
The owner is dead. The cage is unlocked. Police are saying it looks like the owner set them free and then killed himself.
More than 50 law enforcement officials, some equipped with night vision and armed with assault rifles, hunted the animals through the night.
Right now, we're shooting to kill.
About 45 of them escaped, but these numbers have been fluctuating throughout the day.
It's basically a big game hunt.
They estimate that they've already shot between 30 and 35 of the animals.
Says the pig, says rolling in the or a thumbing in your says the horse. Hey, sir, I eat, of course. But yeah, this will. Just running up to say hi at a comfortable dog. Gosh, over. Quack, quack, quack. The duck swimming in the pond. What a great lot. Said, here we go. They all live here on the farm, you see. It's their most favorite place they like to be.
Kim, thank you for being with us. Good morning. That sounds like somebody named Tim as opposed to Kim.
It's Kim.
Okay, Kim.
Kim, K-I-M.
Kim, all right, very good. That sounds like somebody named Tim as opposed to Kim.
It's Kim.
Okay, Kim.
Kim, K-I-M.
Kim, all right, very good. Kim, what's the situation as you know it right now?
Can you imagine what it looked like last night up there? Darkness setting in 1 hour. All of a sudden, the sheriffs are called that there's lions over here in this yard and that yard. All of a sudden, you see 18 tigers coming down the road at you, jumping the fences, going everywhere. A decision had to be made in a split second. What do we do? Darkness coming. We have 40-something carnivores running around here right now.
What they fail to understand is that along with the physiological and the infrastructure and the economical intervention, there should be a psychosocial intervention as well.
For now, aid groups are working behind the scenes.
Attracted and perplexed by the mixed feelings of it that I feel.
I think it's
just
uncomfortable by design.
It's uncomfortable by design, definitely.
It's risky, and I mean this stuff is so risky because you are coming at it. You're coming from a legal perspective and also an ethical perspective, so it's twofold. It's bifurcated, and you have to deal with it in your head, and you got to deal with it outside of your head too.
Could you put some soap in the water? Good job. Thank you. Thank you. Could you listen again? Okay. Kunzi, could you pour a little Coke in the water? Could you pour some Coke in the water? Thank you. That's enough. You can. Okay. Kunzi, pour the Perrier water in the jelly. Thank you. That's good. You see the TV set? Could you take the TV outdoors? Could you carry the television outdoors, please? Thank you.
le ciel innocence, le ciel à peu près, le ciel témérité.
Und wir haben diesmal keinen Showblock, meine Damen und Herren, aber ich muss eine kleine Pause machen für unsere Kandidaten. Die müssen sich eben umziehen vor der letzten Runde und die möchten sich mal ein bisschen erholen hier. So eben auf diesem Sofa.
For there is an undeclared war being waged every day against countless millions of non-human animals. To stand truly for peace is to stand firmly against their ruthless exploitation. And what, aside from the common menu of media distortions, what will be said by the opponents of animal rights? Will the objection be that we are equating animals and humans in every respect, when in fact humans and animals differ greatly? But clearly we are not saying that humans and other animals are the same in every way, that dogs and cats can do calculus, or that pigs and cows enjoy poetry. What we are saying is that, like humans, many other animals have an experiential welfare of their own. In this sense, we and they are the same. In this sense, therefore, despite our many differences, we and they are equal. Will the objection be that we are saying that every human and every animal has the same rights, that chickens should have the right to vote, and pigs the right to ballet lessons? In Darwin's words, humans differ from many other animals in degree and not in kind. Questions about line drawing to one side, it is obvious that the animals used in laboratories, raised for food, and hunted for pleasure or trapped for profit, for example, are our psychological kin. This is not fantasy. This is fact, supported by our best science. The philosophy of animal rights stands for, not against, justice. We are not to violate the rights of the few so that the many might benefit. Slavery allowances, child labor allowances, all unjust social institutions allow this, but the fundamental demand of this philosophy is to treat humans and other animals with respect. This philosophy, therefore, is a philosophy of peace, but it is a philosophy that extends the demand for peace beyond the boundaries of our species. As the lives of these people demonstrate.
Dr. Reagan, could you do your best to bring your remarks to a close?
The choice thoughtful people.
Look, it's obvious that any of us will project certain qualities onto creatures that we want to see on creatures. But the bonobos and all of the great apes and a lot of the higher animals like the cetaceans are exhibiting skills that we never attributed to them before. They're exhibiting language skills, they're exhibiting creativity skills, they're exhibiting tool use skills, they're exhibiting abstraction skills, the ability to distinguish between same and different, to understand that there's information in my mind that isn't the same as information in your mind. That's a very high order thing, that sort of segregation of the self and other. And animals that we thought of as just a collection of very effectively expressed instincts now are known to have these complex internal lives.
What does that say to us in terms of our relationship to animals?
Well, it says a lot about us in terms of our relationship to animals, and that's one of the points we try to make in the story. There are people who still maintain, and through history have maintained, that animals were simple automata, that there wasn't even consciousness in them, and you could frankly make that argument for things like mollusks and cockroaches, perhaps. But most scientists now agree that consciousness burns with almost equal brightness among chimps and humans and dolphins and so forth. And then
so the consciousness of a chimp is as bright as the consciousness of a human?
Well, in the sense that it knows it's here, that it has a life, that it has a sense of past, present, and future, that it wants to live its life with a certain degree of satisfaction and serenity and stimulation, and is aware of its own presence. Now, that fades as you go down the line to other animals, and there is a lot of thought that the way we value their lives should follow a similar sort of cognitive rheostat.
What's the significance of sense of self?
Well, the significance of sense of self is an important feature with a lot of humans, and with all humans, and with a lot of animals. Babies, up until the age of 3, don't have what's known as the theory of mind. There's a wonderful and indeed rather sweet experiment in which a babysitter will hide a toy in a room, and a toddler understands that the toy has been hidden. If I come in the room later, the toddler's assumption will be that I know where the toy is hidden too, because all knowledge must be universal knowledge. Now, that's not just a mistake about information sharing, that's also a mistake about self and other. I have a brain, you have a brain, I have will, you have will. In order for us to get that data into one another's heads, we have to communicate. That sense of, that theory of mind is not in much evidence in a lot of animals. It's in evidence in dogs, which are the only species, aside from humans, that innately understand what pointing means. If you point, the average animal will look at your hand. They don't look at the hand, look at where it's indicating. Babies do it.
And why do they think dogs do it?
Dogs do it almost certainly because of the symbiotic evolution between dogs and humans. Dogs had, when the earliest canids, when the wolves became part of the human community, they happened to be a species that was just through random development nicely and symbiotically attuned to human behavior and human signals. Once they began hanging around human camps, we began reinforcing that trait by rewarding the dogs who were the friendliest. So the dogs that were the friendliest got the most food. They bred with other dogs that showed particularly friendly and alert traits, and pretty soon you're hothousing this theory of mind trait. But dogs and humans aren't the only ones who do it. Blue jays are known to have a theory of mind in that they cache food, they hide food. And a blue jay that hides food and then notices that another blue jay is nearby observing it will wait till the blue jay leaves, but only when the other blue jay leaves, and then re-hide it. Now, as we say in the story, that's not merely understanding that another creature has something in its mind. That's manipulating what's in that creature's mind. The social carnivores, lions, even hyenas, because the cooperativeness of the hunt requires such a sense of communication and such a sense of planning. And planning, remember, implies temporal awareness, the future. So when hyenas will go out hunting, it takes one, maybe two hyenas to bring down a wildebeest. It takes 7 or 8 to bring down a zebra. So hyenas, in whatever way they communicate, will decide, guys, we're getting zebras today. So 6 or 7 of them will go out, and if they're on their way to the zebra, and 2 lonely wildebeest are right there, and they're basically just finger food for hyenas, they'll walk right by because they went out to get zebras. Now that's communication, that's coordination. In order to live collectively like that, you need a higher level of intelligence.
There's 2 prongs to it. On the one hand, the introduction of an animal into an urban environment creates the potential, almost ensures the potential of some type of havoc taking place. On the other hand, which introduces the possibility of injury and, in the extreme case, death of a pedestrian. On the other hand, introducing an animal into an urban environment and considering that animal's safety, see, the 2 are somewhat butting heads, because introducing it into the urban environment immediately compromises its safety of where it was already in a safe place.
There is an ethical point here in a matter of belief, as well as just a social point about the way we experiment on animals. There's a morality to it that needs to be considered on an individual and global and wider level.
Yes, okay. Well, nobody likes the idea of animals suffering in the name of beauty to test cosmetics, but it's harder to condemn scientists, perhaps, who've used animals to research cures for Alzheimer's or a vaccine against malaria or to develop life support systems to help premature babies to survive. Is animal testing ever justified?
I believe that animal testing is justified for the improvement of medicines and treatments. And what I've done, I'm proud of, because it has led to many, many, many thousands of people being improved in their lives, not just with Parkinson's disease, but some work that I did studying how monkeys move their eyes has helped me to understand children with reading disorders.
What was done to the monkeys to facilitate you getting that information about how children
I
move
was
their
actually cooling a part of the brain, not painful at all, in order to cease the functioning temporarily of a part of the brain that we know in humans is important for reading. And what that did was to change the way in which the animals moved their eyes. From that we could deduce things about how children learn to read, the way they move their eyes.
Were their eyes kept open?
Their eyes were always open.
For how long?
They were sitting in chairs for these actual experiments for about half an hour, but the rest of the time they were in gang cages playing with their mates.
Right, okay.
All the experiments we do are done if we're going to be at all invasive. By the way, 95% of experiments are genetic modification experiments, so they don't involve any sort of invasive activity. But if we are going to be invasive, all the surgery is done under anaesthetic, under closer supervision than many human operations, in fact. The brain has no pain receptors, and therefore it is not painful. If it were painful, the monkey would not do the kinds of things that we train them to do, like tracking a moving target with their arm. They enjoy the game just as children enjoy TV, video games, and they cannot be said to be suffering.
The problem is, how can you say that they're enjoying it when they don't have a voice? Typically, as well, just looking at the fact, the animal model is flawed, and I mean there are hundreds of scientists from top universities around the world who say that the animal model is flawed.
Children die for the want of mosquito nets that cost £3 or £4 that will prevent them from suffering malaria. But as a society, we're actually, in a sense, we turn away from that. We're not doing all we can to stop human suffering, and yet somehow we're saying we have a moral obligation to inflict suffering on others, on animals. It makes no sense.
Give us an idea of the stress. If there weren't the moral qualms about the higher primates, such as gorillas and chimpanzees...
Which we don't use at all.
Would you if you could?
No.
Why do you draw the line?
Because I think we have to have a regard to the level of intelligence of the monkeys to try and decide whether or not they are undergoing any suffering.
So at what point in primates does it become acceptable? Orangutans?
All great apes, I think, are out of the question.
Right.
And that is enshrined in law, as you know.
Yeah, but if it weren't enshrined in law, I was just investigating the principle.
Now, I would put a caveat on that. If it were shown to be the case that a particular very, very killing disease could only be modelled in great apes and people were dying in thousands, then I would relax that prohibition.
Would you?
Yes, because in that case, if I could be reasonably sure of developing a cure for a disease that was killing thousands of people, then that would trump, as it were, my worries about the cognitive state of the ape. So that's a very, very unlikely situation.
Your argument is a utilitarian one, that some suffering is justified for the sake of the greater good.
I didn't say anything about suffering. I think there is a problem here. People think the animals suffer. In fact, in all the experiments I do,
the law says the animals suffer. There's no question about whether animals suffer, and it's very concerning
the law
when
does
someone
not,
who experiments on animals
the law does not say that animals suffer.
Yeah.
Yes, do allow me to finish. Without being able to experiment on monkeys, I would not have been able to find the part of the brain that we have found that when we stimulate it, we can reduce many of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, which are otherwise incurable.
I have an issue to take up with you. You are talking about poppycock. You say there is no suffering involved in the experiments that you carry out on monkeys. From the moment these monkeys are ripped from the jungle, from the wild, the other side of this world, the suffering begins. Excuse me, you've spoken. The suffering begins. They are injured in the process. Many of them even die in the transportation process, which can last up to 56 hours. And by the time they arrive here, they have suffered enough before the cruel experiments that you deliberately and intentionally inflict upon these sentient creatures even begins.
All the monkeys that I use
that you carried out, you denied access to fresh water. And you talk about no suffering.
These animals are all bred here. They're not ripped from the jungle, as you say.
But bred in cages, in confinement.
In monkey farms.
Social animals that are denied their natural habitat.
The question is what... Tom's going to give us some perspective. Carl will be with you in a second. Do you believe
this is less than 1 in 1,000 animals is a monkey used in research. 95% are mice, rats, fish and birds, many of which we would find on our dinner plate or in a trap. If you believe that animal suffering is the most important thing, why is it that you are not out campaigning against the millions, hundreds of millions of animals that we eat?
But aren't they killed? They killed suddenly. Well, you are. Yeah, but aren't they killed? Yeah, Ashley, go on.
Yes, can I just say, Peter, you're starting to sound as though you're coming from a pagan perspective, with this moral notion that animals have a right and have a moral and a spiritual existence as well. And I agree with that completely, and that's right, and that's something that we
This is not yours, but it's a case of monkeys having their skulls sawed open and electrodes fitted in and their eyes forced open for 5 days. And that was in the name of general research, finding out the effect of light on the eyes. Does that bother you, Tom?
Well, so long as all the 3 R's, the refinement techniques, the enrichment techniques are there to ensure that animal suffering is minimised wherever it may exist. I do accept that there is certainly going to be some level of discomfort to animals, and I think we have a duty to ensure that animal welfare is prioritised. But I also think we have an even greater priority to ensure that we allow people around to have the treatments tomorrow, so that people aren't dying of cancer, so that people aren't dying of HIV. There are so many diseases which are scourges on humanity, and we have a chance and a duty to try and prevent them.
Most of the story are mice genetically engineered to develop cancer. No, morality is not arithmetic.
We've been talking...
The range is enormous. It is very disturbing to hear a suggestion that they don't suffer. I think everyone with any moral sense whatsoever feels an intuitive sense of revulsion. What can it possibly be other than wrong to create a sentient being that can suffer pain in just the same way as we do? It has the same nerve endings. That's why we do pain research on animals, and actually inflict that suffering upon it.
To suggest there's some great gulf between us and other animals is nonsense. Of course we are more civilized and cultured and have greater intellectual capacities, but the essence is that we are part of the animal kingdom, and other animals have sentience, they can feel pain and suffering, they have basic emotions, they have cognizance. You know, to treat them as objects for our benefit is, I think, is morally wrong. And the argument of the other side is that suffering is justified for the greater good. Well, the logic of that argument is that we should then experiment on humans, because humans should be sacrificed for the greater good. Yeah. I don't believe that for one moment. No. I don't believe that.
Well, there's a lady, you've had your hand up for a long time.
I think it's unacceptable initially to think directly out of the Bible, where God gives the stewardship of the creation, including the animals, for shepherdly care in the hands of human beings, and that is the basis on which we can assert properly, with humility, that there is a priority, as the Professor said, in our accountability and responsibility. And the trouble is, when you take God out of the equation, you end up with these inevitable, unresolvable conflicts. I don't think there's anything unresolvable.
We'll be with that unresolvable conflict on a Sunday morning.
There's nothing unresolvable. If you look at almost all the great moral problems, great suffering, they tend to rely on the notion that the suffering of others is somehow less important than the suffering of me, although...
Testing is not a good thing to do, because it is a cruelty towards animals. But we also have to think that, considering as a human race, and it was rightly said that we also are animals, why are we putting them in doing all that? And why are we doing testing on them? But if you're saying that we, as a science, we need to proceed further, we can't just keep the medicines as they are.
Of the sacrifice of something like 5 monkeys. Now, I think that is worthwhile if we care about our human brethren more than we do about animals.
Yes, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
It is completely acceptable when people say that animal testing is not a good thing to do.
Without being able to experiment on monkeys, I would not have been able to find the part of the brain that we have found that when we stimulate it, we can reduce many of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, which are otherwise incurable. Now, I think that's an advance that we should be proud of, and it's because of the sacrifice.
When we are discovering new and new medicines, why is no human coming ahead, and if we can sign a consent and say, do testing on me? No one is ready to do that.
In fact, I would suggest that the pain the animals suffer is very likely to be much more than the pain the human beings suffer, because the animals live at the level of the senses. Their senses are highly accentuated, so the pain they may feel will be much more, perhaps, than we can ever imagine. So I think we need to be very careful. In days past, we were doing experiments on human beings at the lower rungs of society. In days to come, I think we will also see animal experimentation as a barbaric idea.
As intelligent, civilized people.
We've been talking about brains, but I would say it's a no-brainer that we can use animals in order to serve, to find an end to human suffering.
All animals?
No.
Let's forget about animals again for a second. How many of you think it's morally permissible to kill and eat humans? A show of hands. Okay, the record will show no one raised their hands. But what about, is it permissible to kill and eat humans with their consent? I understand Germany has a little history with this. Have any of you heard of Armin Maiweis? Maybe you've heard of him under the name Der Kannibale. So did Der Kannibale do anything wrong when he killed and ate Bernd Jürgen Brandes with Brandes's consent? My understanding was that the general public thought this was an outrage. How many of you think it was still wrong of Der Kannibale to kill and eat Brandes, even though he, in some sense, consented? Okay, now there's not as many people in agreement, but many people think that. And so that raises an interesting question. Most people certainly believe that it's okay to kill and eat animals. So the question is, if it's wrong to eat humans, even with their consent, is it permissible to eat animals without their consent? Because they don't consent to being killed and eaten. And then a final question is, are there any ways that it would be wrong to treat animals? Is there anything we could do to an animal that would be wrong to that animal? So if I were to walk up to a 6-month-old dog, a puppy, pour gasoline on it and light the dog on fire and let it burn to death, how many of you think that would be wrong? Okay. Again, pretty wide consensus on that. I don't know in Germany, I know in the United States that there are laws against that. That would be considered aggravated animal abuse, and it's actually a Class 3 felony. So that at least certain things it seems that we can do to animals, there's wide consensus that it would be wrong to treat them in that way. Okay, and that's of course independent of whether they have rights. Right? So that already starts to suggest that there might be a wedge that gets driven between the question of whether they have rights and the question of whether it's permissible to do just anything we want with them. Okay, so those are some preliminary questions. Why the question matters, here I have the question in mind, is do animals have rights? Why the question matters? Well, let's look at how we typically treat animals. We breed, confine, mutilate, kill, and eat them. We use them in painful psychological and medical experiments. We test cosmetics and household cleaning products on them by force-feeding these substances to them, or by placing these substances in their eyes, their anuses, and vaginas, till 50% of the animals die. We catch them in painful leg hold traps and kill them for their fur. We also raise them in confinement and anally electrocute them for their fur. Anal electrocution prevents the pelts from being damaged. We remove them from their natural habitats and families and place them in circuses and zoos for our own amusement. And we track them down and kill them for fun in sport hunting, not survival hunting, but sport hunting. So I think it's sufficient to say that we all think that treating human beings in any of those ways would be profoundly morally wrong. Now, if it's profoundly morally wrong to treat human beings in those ways, but morally permissible to treat animals in those ways, then there has to be some sort of morally relevant difference between humans and animals that would account for this difference in what it's permissible to do to humans and non-humans.